What is known as the most versatile focal length because it offers an angle of view like the human eye? Let's get started and talk about Fujifilm's 35mm prime options. Hey guys, welcome back on my channel. For everyone who doesn't know me yet, my name is Jochen. I'm an amateur photographer from Düsseldorf, Germany, and I mainly do street photography and portraits. Have a look at my Instagram feeds. Perhaps Santa brought your first Fujifilm camera for Christmas, or you just gave it to yourself like I did with my new Fujifilm X Pro 3, even if it's not my first one. And perhaps the camera came as a kit with the 18-55 or the 16-80 kit lens. And if you are a beginner, you maybe heard that a prime lens is usually faster and is also great for improving your photography skills. And then you also heard about the nifty 50, a lens with a 50mm focal length equivalent, and that it renders images that closely match the true perspective of the human eye. And indeed, in the old days of analog photography, where I come from, these 50mm lenses were the kit lenses that usually came together with your camera. Here is my old nifty 50 of my Minolta SLR, the Rokkor f1.7. In the Fuji X system we are using an APS-C sensor, so a 35mm lens corresponds most closely to the 50mm in full format. And just like all other camera manufacturers, this is the focal length for which Fuji has the most lens options. I own two of them myself, namely the 35mm f1.4, which was released in 2012, which costs around 600 euros, and the newer 35mm f2 from 2015, which costs around 400 euros. First of all, they are both excellent lenses that I really enjoy using, but both have their advantages and disadvantages, which we would like to talk about in this video. But I also don't want to hide from you the third option from Fujifilm, the XC 35mm f2, a lens that corresponds to my XF 35mm f2, except that it lacks an aperture ring and is completely made of plastic. In return, its price is for the really tight budget because it costs less than 200 euros. I didn't try out this lens because I'm a fan of aperture rings, but if you don't mind, take a good look at it. Everything I tell you about this XF 35mm f2 regarding speed and image quality should also apply to the XC variant. Let's first talk about the similarities of these lenses. In my opinion, both deliver great image quality. I took enough pictures with both of them on different cameras to be able to say that with full conviction. In all of the reviews that I've read, both are considered to be absolutely sufficiently sharp over their entire aperture range and provide only a few distortions and aberration, maybe with slight advantages for the f1.4. Both have an aperture ring with clicks, both have a minimum aperture of f16, and both housings are made of metal. Let's let the older lens take precedence and start with the 1.4. On the pro side, this f1.4 is of course very fast and offers many options for separating the object from the background. Along with my 56mm 1.2, it makes the favorite portrait setup. f1.4 is a whole f-stop faster than f2, but more on that later. It is very easy to use due to its comfortable size, even for my rather large hands. The lens hood is made of metal and is very beautiful. This lens takes great pictures with a certain magic that I can't even explain technically, and its closest focus distance is only 28 centimeters. Let's talk about its cons. The biggest disadvantage of this lens is its slower and louder autofocus in comparison to the f2. More on that also later. At over 600 euros, the lens is still not a small purchase that you should think about well if the budget is limited. And the lens is not weather sealed. The size is great, but a little disadvantage in the OVF of the X Pro 3 because it is even visible in the frame. Well, let's switch to the 35mm f2. On the pro side, this lens is very reliable and has a very fast autofocus. It's lighter and more subtle for street photography, for example. It's weather sealed. It is significantly cheaper. It's smaller and in fact so small that it does not affect the frame inside the OVF of the X Pro 3. On the con side, it is only f2. The aperture and focus ring is very small and difficult to use, and it came with this silly, really silly lens hood. And this is why I bought this beautiful metal lens hood, which also fits my 23mm f2. Now it really looks nice. First we will do an aperture comparison, wide open under the same light conditions. We set the shutter speed to auto and the ISO fix, and we compare the shutter speed and the bokeh. Then we'll do the same setup but all set manual and see what amount of light is coming through each lens when wide open. The first thing you may notice, 35mm is obviously not exactly the same as 35mm because we are a little closer with the f2 lens. Apart from that, everything is exactly the same. Fully open aperture, fixed ISO 6400, only the shutter speed is set to auto. And with f1.4 we get a value about a 60th of a second, while with f2 only a 30th, well, sometimes a 40th is possible. Let's say this is one whole stop less. Incidentally, the bokeh balls look very nice on both versions, but the rest of the background is creamier on the f1.4. And this is something that has to be said in general. I did some direct comparison with some photos for you, and the 1.4 offers a much softer, creamier and less irritating bokeh wide open. Well, somehow the higher price has to be justified. Anyway, the f2 is not doing bad at all. But let's get back to my high scientific setup. Well, now everything is set to manual just to show you what the full aperture stop means in terms of light coming through the lens. As you can see, the f2 lens delivers a significantly darker image wide open with fixed ISO and shutter speed. Technically, a full aperture stop less means half the light is able to hit the sensor or film. That, of course, is a lot when you do low light and available light photography. Okay guys, let's do some AF testing, and first I tested with the 35mm f2, and as you can see I have face detection on and I chose the right eye priority. So let's see how this is getting. I guess this works really great. No pumping, smooth transitions. I have to say that this is the X-T3 with the actual firmware update 4.0, so enhanced autofocus performance just like the X-T4, I guess. So this is the f1.4. I stopped down the ISO to 400 to have the same light conditions because I wanted to test the f wide open with both lenses. Let's see what is happening here. Okay. Now you see that the lens takes significantly longer if you're going from this to there. This is not as smooth as with the f1.4, and I can hear it. If you're doing video with autofocus, I guess the f1.4 is no way because it's too loud. But of course, I have to say that with the newer cameras like the X-T3 and the X-Pro 3, the autofocus performance of the f1.4 is much better than, for example, with my old X-E3. Well, which 35mm do I use for what? Let's talk about street. First of all, I really like the 35mm focal length in street photography. In the meantime, I have also learned to work with the 23mm of the X100V or even the 16mm f1.4 and to get close, but sometimes I feel better with the 35mm. Well, for street, both lenses are a good choice in terms of focal length for me. If I go out on a nice bright day and I know that I don't want to cut out my object too much from the background, then I definitely take the 35mm f2 with me. It offers an excellent look, a great sharpness with smaller apertures, and it's just so fast and reliable regarding autofocus that I can do without zone focusing, which is rather difficult to use with 35mm anyway. In addition, dirt and splash water can't harm me because it's a WR lens and I have to carry less weight with me. The absolute perfect balance on the X-Pro 3 rounds it off, while on the X-T3 I think it's almost a little too small. In street photography I neither use the focus nose ring very often, nor do I keep adjusting the aperture so that the small rings don't bother me very much. If I go out at night for street or have a special idea with a particularly blurred background in mind, then the 35mm f1.4 will definitely go into my camera bag. In such cases I also adjust a lot, for which the haptically clearly better rings of the f1.4 are more suitable. Well, let's talk about portraits. With portraits the choice is very simple, 35mm f1.4. I really can't explain the magic that creates the look of the pictures with this lens, and I was relieved to find out that other and much better photographers also have a hard time explaining it, but that's the way it is. Nevertheless, I was annoyed from time to time about a missed focus on the eye and wished for the AF performance of the f2 lens. The f2 is really not at all unsuitable for portraits, but since I now have the choice, it is unfortunately always only second. I can therefore recommend it unreservedly for beginners, and it has also opened the curtain for portraits with this focal length for me. Professional photographers, on the other hand, supposedly even come into the Fuji X system because of the 35mm f1.4. I've read that several times, so the choice should be clear here. For my everyday photography I always both lenses on the cameras alternately. If it has to be fast like with my children, the f2 is my first choice. If I want to separate more, I always use the f1.4. Both deliver wonderful image quality, each with its own character, great colors, beautiful bokeh and great contrasts. On vacation, where I usually don't want to carry that much, the f2 would have a slight lead here, especially since I hardly have to worry about the sand on the beach. Let's come to a short conclusion. In terms of the total number of points, the 35mm f2 actually won. More than sufficient for almost all occasions, much faster and smaller and weatherproof. Since it also costs 1/3 less than the 1.4 variant, I can only give a clear recommendation to buy it. And keep the XC variant in mind. Nevertheless, I was magically attracted by the f1.4. I had it here for testing at the time and I really had no intention of keeping it. But after my first portrait shoot with it, I was immediately hooked. The look of this lens is unique and very well known. I can only agree to all the lovers of this lens and recommend a purchase if you need the larger aperture for low light or mainly want to do portraits. But you can see I have both lenses. I always wanted to part with one of them, each time for different reasons, but I couldn't because both have their certain advantages and I use them on different occasions. Thank you Greenlight for turning off. Sometimes it's not that easy to decide which one to take with you. Then I faced this tough decision again. But I hope I was able to help at least some of you with a decision for one of these great nifty 50s. If you have any questions on this lenses or any other topic, feel free to write me in the comments. I usually answer within a few hours. Don't forget to give me a like. And please subscribe to my channel, switch on the notifications so that you don't miss any more videos. If you find my content really helpful, consider buying me a coffee via buymeacoffee.com. The link can be found also in the description. Well, that's it for today. I hope to see you soon, guys. Take care of yourself. Have a good time. Ciao.